It's taken us some time to get here, but today's the day we are finally going to finish Dante's Divine Comedy with the last four cantos of the Paradiso. In our last discussion, we were looking at the Prima Mobile and all of the angels who were there, and talking about the different orders of angels. Now we are going to move into our final vision. And to some extent, we've looked at the organization of heaven, but the term organization there we can kind of look a little bit askance at, because really everything that's happened up to this point has only been helping Dante to understand heaven a little bit better so that he can actually see heaven. He hasn't really seen heaven yet. All those different planets that he passed by were really organized, as we heard early on, for his benefit and for his learning and his education. It's not till now that he actually gets to see everything put together. Even the rather large vision of the entire church as a garden, with Mary and Jesus passing through there, was yet a pre-glimpse of what he's about to see. And so at the beginning of Canto 30, Dante has just been looking at all of these rings of angels, and they begin to fade out as the light grows, as dawn seems to eclipse and absorb the light of all the stars. And Dante realizes he's moving yet again, this time into the Empyrean, beyond all matter. And of course he looks to Beatrice, as he always does, and we know we've been following that same pattern over and over again, that each time he takes a step up she becomes more beautiful, and he struggles even harder to discuss that. So much so that he completely admits his failure here, and says that not only can he not express it, nor can he remember it, nor could he even take it in at the moment. In fact, the only person who could truly enjoy her beauty is God himself. The beauty that I saw transcends all thought of beauty, and I must believe that only its maker may savor it all. I declare myself defeated at this point more than any poet, whether comic or tragic, was ever thwarted by a topic in his theme. For, like sunlight striking on my weakest eyes, the memory of the sweetness of that smile deprives me of my mental powers. Just trying to remember it blows his mind again. And then he continues his thought and links back everything he's ever thought of her. Listen to this. From the first day when in this life I saw her face, until my vision of her now, pursuit of her in song has never been cut off. But now I must desist in my pursuit, no longer following her beauty in my verse, as every artist, having reached his limit, must. Thus I leave her to more glorious trumpeting than that of my own music, as laboring on, I bring my difficult subject towards its close. And so he links back all the way to his earlier work, the Vita Nuova, in which he described his relationship and his love for Beatrice, and how his love for her sparked him into all of this poetry. At the end of that book, he expresses the idea that until his ability grows, he will not be able to write about her. And so here he has reached, again, a pinnacle at which he must let go. But as he lets go of his attempt to describe his love for her, he's letting go at the point at which no one could ever possibly describe it. That only perfect divine love could ultimately appreciate what it is that he's seeing here. And Beatrice begins to speak and tells him that now they have ascended to the ultimate heaven, the heaven of light and love. This is it. This is it. And here's where both hosts are. All of the believers and also all of the angels. She says, "Here you shall see both soldieries of paradise, one of them in just such form as you shall see it in the final judgment." And so he's going to get a glimpse of the church, all of Christianity, as they serve God in their final form. Even though they haven't put on their bodies yet, he gets a kind of a glimpse of them in that way. And again, his eyes aren't up to it. He sees all of this light pouring down, and he hears, "The love that calms this heaven always offers welcome with such greetings to make the candle ready for its flame." And this light that's pouring over him is preparing him to be able to see. And this light that strikes him is described as being like lightning, which is interesting because it connects to a vision that Paul saw. Do you remember the Apostle Paul, how he saw a vision that blinded him? Here, Dante gets the reverse. He gets this bright light that shines into his face, which gives him vision. Hold that thought. When he's finally able to see, he sees this river made of light, and all around it are all of these flowers, and these bees are buzzing in the flowers like sparks. I saw light that flowed as flows a river, pouring its golden splendor between two banks, painted with wondrous colors of spring. From that torrent issued living sparks that on either bank they settled on the flowers like rubies ringed in gold. This is an image borrowed from Virgil, the Aeneid. And here again we have one more connection back to Dante's first guide, Virgil. That may be important in just a moment. But notice how he connects to this image that Aeneas saw when Aeneas was going into the afterlife. Do you remember all the way back in Inferno 2 when Dante first takes his very first step of the journey? So Inferno 1, he was lost, he's confused, Virgil finds him and says, let's go. He gets ready to go. At the beginning of Inferno Canto 2, he takes one step and he goes, no, wait a second, I'm no hero, I can't do this. This trip is too big for me. And he says, I'm not Paul, who got to see a vision of heaven. I'm not Aeneas, who got to travel into the afterlife. I'm neither a great classical hero nor a great Christian hero that I should take this journey. And Virgil had to straighten him out, pointing out that it was not Dante's own strength that was going to get him through this, but the divine love that flowed down from Mary to Beatrice, down ultimately to Dante, that got him here. We revisit that here in Canto 30 as we remember how Beatrice came to get him the first time, and when Dante said, I'm not Paul, I'm not Aeneas, I'm no good, here he is taking the place of Paul and Aeneas. He is seeing that shining light. He is seeing that vision of those flowers and sparks in them that Aeneas saw. He is the hero. Why? Because he's been brought here. And just like we heard that story in Inferno 2, how the Virgin Mary sent St. Lucia to go get Beatrice and send Beatrice down into the underworld, Dante is again going to remember that great sacrifice in the next two cantos, as he says goodbye to Beatrice. But in order to understand what he's seeing, he also has to drink from this river of light. And there's another one of those mirrors where Purgatorio, Canto 30, was the moment when Dante was drinking from the river. And also it was a transition between guides, when he let go of Virgil and turned to Beatrice. Here he's going to have a letting go of Beatrice and a turning toward his new guide, his final surprise guide that he gets in the last few cantos here. More on that in just a moment. And as he drinks from the river, it begins to transform and change, and the light turns into a circle, and these flowers change and transform into the congregation of all of the saved. And these sparks that were dancing back and forth are the angels who are flying like bees between the light of God and all of this group of saved. But even though they're flying back and forth between the light of God and all the saved, they are not in any way blocking the light. The light is all permeating. And so Dante gets a final vision, and all the saved here, these are all the people that he's met along the way on this journey. The ones from each of those planets and each of those areas, and all the angels are here too. This is it. This is heaven. But even this is something that's only an imperfect vision for him, because his power of sight, no matter how it's intensified, is not strong enough to ultimately fully take in what he sees here. We'll get into that more in just a moment. And this whole congregation makes up this giant rose that's going to be described rather in depth in the next few cantos. There are many, many seats filled, but there are some still empty. And Dante also notes that because he is beyond all of the natural world and nature, he is there in the presence of God, the rules of physics and nature don't apply anymore. And so if he tries to see something that is infinitely far away, it seems as close to him as he desires. There, near and far, do neither add nor take away, for where God unmediated rules, natural law has no effect. Ah, I totally get that last part of the Chronicles of Narnia now. That makes sense. And as the canto closes, Beatrice points to a place where she says that Henry is going to sit. Henry VII, who was a king that Dante had great hopes in, hoping that he would rise to power and really take control and raise up the empire and straighten out a lot of the wrongs of Italy and the injustices of the church, but things did not work out according to his hopes. ultimately because of the jealousies and injustices of the papacy, particularly Clement V, who acted like he was going to support Henry, but then undercut him. Henry failed and died early. And so Dante closes this speech with a last dig at the popes, both Clement V, but also his favorite pope to hate on, Boniface VIII. And Dante continues describing the rose as Canto 31 begins. He's looking at this huge white rose with the yellow center and the angels flying back and forth like bees. And as Dante is looking at this, he uses a simile. One of three similes he's going to use in Canto 31. Of barbarians coming into Rome and seeing the order and the beauty and the establishment there, and how awestruck they are by that. And he says, imagine those barbarians who don't know the beauty of architecture and the beauty of all this city, and they come and they see this. How much more was my awe as I, who come from the disorder and chaos of Florence, standing now in a place that is all right and light and love. So he's going to continue using this image of a person coming from one place, going to another, and standing in awe in front of something. It's a pilgrimage kind of image, which helps to emphasize the fact that here he is at the end of his own pilgrimage, finally seeing what it is that he wanted to see. Indeed, between the wonder and my joy, I was content neither to hear nor speak a word. And then he continues with a second simile that mirrors the first. A pilgrim who goes out and then comes home to tell his tale. A pilgrim who has arrived at the temple and is trying to drink it all in so that he can repeat it back when he gets home. Dante is looking at all of this and trying to take it in. And after trying to absorb it all for a moment, he turns to Beatrice to try to ask her some questions about it, finally. But she's not there. And we remember that moment in Purgatorio when he turns back to Virgil and Virgil has vanished. But in this case, it's not as shocking or as hard. Virgil's disappearance was one of kind of sadness. Especially in that moment because Dante was about to be chided really hard by Beatrice because he had been unfaithful to her and turned his back on her for Lady Philosophy instead. But here instead he sees an old man, Saint Bernard this is. He's going to reveal himself in a moment. Why does Dante switch up guides at the last moment? Well, one reason is to make three guides. We have Virgil, Beatrice, and now Saint Bernard. And that completes our set of three. But also to allow Dante to shift his love from Beatrice to a higher love at this last moment. Not that he's letting go of his love for Beatrice. In fact, it is more intense and real than it's ever been before. But he gets to use that love that he was reaching towards Beatrice and ultimately reach towards the highest goal. Notice the way he does that in the rest of this section. And after all, Beatrice isn't actually gone. She's just returned to her seat in this great rose. And although she's not right next to him anymore, he can see her just as well as if she were. Because remember, space is completely meaningless here. You can see as far as you like. St. Bernard says, if you raise your eyes to the third circle below the highest tier, you shall see her again, now on the throne her merits have assigned. Without a word I lifted up my eyes and saw that she, reflecting the eternal rays, appeared to be encircled by a crown. From the highest region where the thunder breaks down to the bottom of the deepest sea, no mortal eye is ever quite so far as was my sight removed from Beatrice. Yet to me that mattered not, because her image came down undimmed by anything between. So even though she is as far as it could possibly be from her, because this rose is huge, Dante can still see her just as clearly. And he gives a final speech towards Beatrice here. O lady, who gives strength to all my hope, and who allowed yourself for my salvation to leave your footprints there in hell. Of all the many things that I have seen, I know the grace and virtue I've been shown come from your goodness and your power. It is you who, on no matter what the path, have drawn me forth from servitude to freedom by every means that you had in your power. Keep your munificence alive in me, so that my soul, which you have healed, may please you when it leaves its mortal frame. This was my prayer, and she, however far away she seemed, smiled and looked down at me, then turned again to the eternal fountain. And so Dante speaks to her one more time as she's way up there above him. And she gives him that last smile. Notice how he puts her as a Christ figure here. Her love taught him love. She descended down into hell for him, to get him Virgil, so that he could have a guy that would lead him up to her. Through her, he's learned what love is all about, so that now he can turn his love towards the eternal fountain just as she does. But now St. Bernard is going to give his eyes a final preparation for the greatest sight of all. He says, "Let your sight fly through this garden, for seeing it will help prepare your eyes to rise along the beam of holy light. And heaven's queen, for whom I burn with love, will grant us every grace, since I am her own, her faithful Bernard." And Dante uses his third simile, repeating the same pattern of a man who's come from far away, seeing the cloth of Veronica. In tradition, Veronica pressed a cloth onto the face of Jesus as he was walking toward the cross, and the imprint of his face still remains in the cloth, and you can see his face in the cloth. And Dante talks about a stranger, a foreigner from far away, arriving in Rome and seeing that image and understanding who he truly saw and the awe that he would feel. Again, that pilgrim on the pilgrimage. That's how Dante felt as he looks at St. Bernard and realizes who he is. St. Bernard was a great mystical thinker, known, and especially for Dante here, for his great love and reflection on Mary. Also, there's a little bit of a link between him and Dante's great-grandfather, Cacciaguida, who we saw earlier, because St. Bernard was one who urged the Second Crusade, and Cacciaguida was the one who died in the Second Crusade. Dante doesn't specifically mention that here, but there's still that sense of connection. But St. Bernard doesn't want Dante to be looking at him, he wants Dante to be looking up. "Child of grace," he said, "you will not know this joyful state if you maintain your gaze, instead of upward, fixed down here. Rather to the highest circles raise your eyes, so that you may behold the Queen enthroned, her to whom this realm is subject and devout." And so both of them turn to look at Mary, in order to strengthen their eyes to ultimately look at God. And as he sees the beauty of Mary, it's like the light shining around her sort of makes the rest of the light almost dim a little. And Dante uses the same form he's been using to talk about Beatrice. He shifts his love to a new lady, just as he had done once before when he shifted his love from Beatrice to Lady Philosophy, but this time no longer shifting away from Beatrice, it's rather including and understanding love in a higher form by looking to Mary. And as St. Bernard looks at Dante and sees Dante's love for Mary, it intensifies St. Bernard's love. We see, again, that love is a mirror. When two people are loving together, it intensifies both of their loves. Canto 32 mostly covers St. Bernard describing who is in the rose. And, well, there's a lot of people in the rose, but he picks out 18 people in particular. He also talks about the structure of the rose. He begins with the women, pointing out Mary up there already. He points right under Mary is Eve, the mother of all people. She's also the woman who took the fruit that ultimately brought sin into the world. But he also points out the proximity between Eve and Mary, that Mary brought forth the fruit that saves the world from sin, and Eve ate the fruit, bringing sin into the world. The wound that Mary closed up and anointed was opened and inflicted by the lovely woman now at Mary's feet. And he shifts to several other significant Hebrew women. There's Rachel, who we had mentioned before next to Beatrice, Sarah, Rebecca, Judith, and Ruth. And instead of saying Ruth's name, we describe her as the great-grandmother of that singer who, grieving for his sin, cried, "Miserere mei." It's David's great-grandmother. But notice how he mentions David by pointing him out as the one who cried out, "Have mercy on me." The exact same wording that Dante used at the very beginning, Inferno Canto 1, when he was crying out for mercy in his despair, ultimately showing how we have arisen from that pit of despair to this highest point. And he points down at the other Hebrew women going down the line. And he shows that this particular line down the center of the rose is the dividing line between the two halves of the rose. There's the one half, those who came before Christ, but yet believed that he was coming. And their faith ultimately in him led them to arrive in this particular place. So we have half the rose is full of Hebrews. The second half is incomplete. It is those who came to faith after Christ and put their faith in Christ. There are still holes there where people will die and ultimately be here. He goes to the opposite side of the rose from Mary and points out the line there. It starts with John the Baptist and moves to St. Francis, St. Benedict, and St. Augustine. He then describes the middle part of the rose, which is yellow, and it's made up of babies who died before their own personal faith, but yet are saved by the prayers of their family. Then St. Bernard clarifies before Dante can ask a question. He sees the doubt in Dante's face. Dante sees that everyone is organized by merit here, and yet how do you lay out the merit of babies who never even had faith? And St. Bernard's thing is, yes, they are organized by merit because God knows perfectly, and so he knows how to organize them. Just like he did with Jacob and Esau. And then he clarifies the difference between the children who are in limbo, in the Inferno, who we saw way back in Inferno, and the children here. And it has to do with baptism. In early times, their parents' faith alone, coupled with the innocence that they possessed, gave sufficient proof of their salvation. Once the first age had run its course, male children had to find the strength for innocent wings in circumcision. But once the time of grace had come, then, without perfect baptism in Christ, such innocents were cast below. But now it's time for Dante to look again at Mary and to really take her in, because only by looking at Mary are his eyes going to be strong enough. And as he looks at her, he sees the angel that we saw with her before in his previous vision of her. And the angel is singing Ave Maria. And Dante asks for clarity who that angel is, and St. Bernard says, this is Gabriel, the one who brought her the message that she would bear Christ. And then St. Bernard continues his instruction of who is sitting there in that ring. There's Peter and Adam beside Mary. And then as you continue outward, John is by Peter and Moses is by Adam. On the opposite side, we have Anna and St. Lucia. But now as they are coming to the end of their time, it's time for Dante to prepare himself to actually look at God. Let us fix our eyes on primal love, so that looking up toward him you penetrate as far as may be done his brilliance. But lest by any chance beating your wings and thinking to advance you should fall back, you must gain your grace through prayer, grace from her who has the power to help you. You shall follow me with your devotion, so your heart does not stray from my words. And so St. Bernard ends the canto by preparing to say a prayer for Dante, because Dante's vision is ultimately only going to be carried this far by a higher grace. And so Bernard begins to pray to Mary. Last canto, Canto 33! It begins as St. Bernard opens his prayer. His prayer is full of paradox. He calls the Virgin Mary daughter of her Son, both more humble and exalted than any other creature. That God became the creature of his creature. And because love and hope came through Christ's birth from her, they turned to her for help. This man who, from within the deepest pit the universe contains up to these heights, has seen the disembodied spirits one by one, now begs you by your grace to grant such power that, by lifting up his eyes, he may rise higher toward his ultimate salvation. But then St. Bernard concludes by saying, and I, who never burned for my own seeing more than I now burn for his, offer all my prayers, and pray that they may not fall short, so that your prayers disperse on his behalf all clouds of his mortality, to let the highest beauty be displayed to him. Notice again that same mirror. It's St. Bernard loves Dante more than he loves himself. He prays more for Dante than he prays for himself. It's the selflessness of love, ultimately, here. And Mary answers with her eyes by looking down at them, so that Dante may now look to God. And as I neared the end of all desire, I extended to its limit, as was right, to the ardor of the longing in my soul. With his smile, Bernard signaled that I look upward, but of my own accord I was already doing what he wished, for my sight, becoming pure, rose higher and higher through the ray of the exalted light that in itself is true. From that time on, my power of sight exceeded that of speech, which fails at such a vision, as memory fails at such abundance. Just as the dreamer, after he awakens, still stirred by feelings that the dream evoked, cannot bring the rest of it to mind, such am I. My vision almost faded from my mind, while in my heart there still endures the sweetness that was born of it. And so he begins to look up, and the beauty and the sweetness of what he sees is something he will never be able to describe to us. And he's going to spend the rest of the time trying but failing, and exploring the failure of memory, the failure of language, how this will never be able to capture what he took in. And so we have an invocation of Mary to give him the power to see God. But then he turns and invokes God to help him to, at least in some way, in some part, remember now, so that he can try to convey it to us. O light exalted beyond mortal thought, grant that in memory I see again but one small part of how you then appeared, and grant my tongue sufficient power that it may leave behind a single spark of glory for the people yet to come. Since, if you return but briefly to my mind, and then resound but softly in these lines, the better will your victory be conceived. So he asks God, this final invocation to God, to give him just a little bit more of the memory, just a little bit more of the ability to express that memory, so that he can give it to us as the final scribe of this. He keeps looking even though it feels overwhelming, but he's been given the grace to see this. O plenitude of grace by which I could presume to fix my eyes upon eternal light until my sight was spent on it. In its depth I saw contained by love into a single volume bound the pages scattered through the universe, substances, accidents, and the interplay between them, as though they were conflated in such ways that what I tell is but a simple light. And so finally he sees and understands it all. Inside he sees the Trinity as this triple rainbow of light. In the deep, transparent essence of the lofty light there appeared to me 3 circles having 3 colors, but the same extent, and each one seems reflected by the other, as rainbow is by rainbow, while the third seemed fire, equally breathed forth by one and by the other. That's the Father, Son, and Spirit. How scant is speech, too weak to frame my thoughts. Compared to what I still recall, my words are faint. To call them little is to praise them much. O eternal light, abiding in yourself alone, knowing yourself alone, and known to yourself, and knowing, loving, and smiling on yourself. The ultimate, he sees. And then he has this great math simile, like the geometer who fully applies himself to square the circle, and, for all his thought, cannot discover the principle he lacks. Such was I at that strange new light. I tried to see how the image fit the circle, and how it found its wear in it. He tries to see it, he tries to wrap his mind around it, like trying to square a circle. It can't be done, it's impossible. But my wings had not sufficed for that, and had not my mind been struck by a bolt of lightning that granted what I asked. And so it's impossible to understand, it's impossible to take in, and yet he's given the grace to do it. His mind is open fully to see this and to understand it, even though it's never something he can convey back to us. And as he concludes it, he says, "Here my exalted vision lost its power. But now my will and my desire, like wheels revolving with an even motion, were turning with the love that moves the sun and all the other stars." We end with the word stars, as we ended Inferno, as we ended Purgatorio. And his will and his desire are turning with the love that is the center of everything, that comprises everything and makes up everything. And ultimately, Dante is made one with that love. I love this poem, it's beautiful, and now that we've gotten to the end of it, we need to go back and read it again, because now we've seen what it's all about, we gotta see it over again. Thank you for going with me on this journey. It has taken me so long. It has been so hard, but I've enjoyed it so much, and I'm so thankful to be done. Whew, yay! Dante is some amazing stuff, and each time I reread it, I get more out of it. So it's well worth starting back over from the beginning. Thank you for watching, thank you for going with me on this journey, and thank you for celebrating Dante with me. As a close, let me show you this really cool thing. On my 35th birthday, I had a huge party and celebrated that it was my Dante birthday. And my party was this huge, almost like pageant. I got all my nieces and nephews and relatives to act out parts from the Divine Comedy. And everyone had to go through with passports and have their passports stamped at each of the circles and each of the rings and everything. It was so much fun. At the very end I had this rose window that I had made, and everyone signed a little part of the rose window representing the final rose that Dante sees with all the different seats in it. So I'll show you that really quickly as we close. Thank you for watching, have a wonderful day, and keep enjoying the really awesome literature out there. Bye-bye.